Well, welcome everyone. So glad you're joining us here this Mother's Day weekend. My name's Erik. I just want to let you know it's an honor to be with you here today. And we're launching a brand new teaching series on the book of Esther called Hidden God. Hidden God. But before we get to Esther, I'm going to tell you about another book that my mom bought my brothers and I very frequently when we were kids. And maybe you had one, or maybe you bought one of your kids' book before, but they were these books right here. They were Where's Waldo books. Right? Did you buy one of these? Or do you have them? Or are you familiar with this series? I'm just wondering, because let me just get a little refresher for all of us. Where's Waldo is all about a ton of characters dressed up like Waldo, but it's the reader's job to locate the real Waldo. It kind of looks like this. All these characters are dressed up just like him, but it's your job as the reader to locate the real Waldo. And full disclosure, I hate these books. I hate them because growing up as a kid, my brothers and my friends and my family, they were honestly so much better at locating Waldo than I was. I mean, it literally took them half the time to find Waldo that it took me. And they would brag, they would rub it in my face, and I would just get so frustrated, right? I would almost honestly audibly bellow, "Why can't I find you, Waldo? Where are you? Why can everyone else find you, but why can't I?" I almost felt like Waldo personally had it out for me. Like he personally wanted to make it really difficult for me to find him and locate him. And now I get it. That's just being a little bit dramatic, but I was a really dramatic kid and all through my childhood. But here's what's interesting. What I've noticed is that for some of us, not only is it difficult for us to find Waldo at times, it also is difficult for us to find God. Because I think, isn't it interesting that some of us, we go through seasons of life and we wonder, hey, God, where are you? It seems like you're hiding. Hey, God, you're not really evident in my life right now. I can't see you or sense you. In the midst of all this chaos, God, I'm wondering, where are you right now? And even in our minds, in our hearts, in our souls, we actually ask God, hey, I'm trying to ask you a question, or I had a prayer request. I'm trying to have a conversation with you, God, but why aren't you responding to me? Where are you in any of this, God? It seems like you're distant, and it seems like you're really hard to find right now. And for some of you, that might be exactly what you're experiencing right now. In fact, if we were having coffee together right now at your favorite coffee shop, or my favorite coffee shop, if we sat down and if you had the vulnerability and courage, you might actually say, hey, Erik, that's exactly how I feel right now. I can't see God at all in my life. And the reason that might be true for you is because you're at a stage and a season of transition. Like you're somewhere in between. You're in between here and where you want to be. Like you're in this season of, you know what? I'm in this transition and I feel kind of stuck. I feel stuck at my job. I feel stuck in my marriage. I feel stuck in my purpose. I just feel stuck in life right now. I know where I want to be, and I'm wondering, God, what are you up to, and how come I can't get there? You're in a season of transition, and it's really hard for you to see God. But others of you might be in a season in a waiting room, and you're wondering, God, how long is this going to take? I mean, you're waiting and waiting. Some of you are waiting and saying, hey, God, when am I going to find that mate? When am I going to find that spouse, God? Hey, God, when are we going to get pregnant and start our family? Hey, God, how long is it going to be like this? Hey, God, I got a question. When are things going to go back to normal? God, when can I ditch this mask? God, when is all this distance or hybrid learning going to finally be over with? And you're just in this season of waiting, wondering what God's up to and how long is it going to take? But then there's a segment of you out there that you feel like you're in a season of pain and discomfort. And you're wondering, will your pain, maybe physically or emotionally, will ever end? It's been a season that's completely exhausted you. And truthfully, some of your pain, physical and emotional pain, actually might not be your fault at all. It might be the result of someone else's actions towards you. That it might be someone who's abusing their power Or maybe they're just toxic or they're angry. Whatever the case is, you're wondering in this season, hey, God, where are you in any of this? How are you going to redeem this pain, God? How are you going to use this for good in my story? And I wish you would just show your faith because it feels like you're hiding right now. Now, if you find yourself in any of those categories, I just want to say to you, as one of your pastors, I want to say you're not alone. And in fact, to comfort you a little bit, I just want to say there's been people who've gone before you and been through certain stages and seasons, exactly what you have been experiencing. In fact, thousands of years ago, God's people in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, that's exactly what they were wondering. They were stuck in a season of waiting, of transition, of pain and discomfort, wondering, God, where are you in any of this? And it's exactly where we find them in the book of Esther, which we're going to study over the next 3 weeks. Now, the Jewish people of the Old Testament that we're going to study over the next 3 weeks, they had plenty of reasons to wonder, what's up, God, and where are you? Because their history up to this point had been pretty rocky. Let me show you. Their nation and their city of Jerusalem, they were conquered by the Babylonians in 586 BC, and then again by the Persians in 539 BC. And where we're going to find ourselves today is about 100 years after the Babylonian captivity and about 70 years after the Persian captivity. They are finding themselves in a season wondering, God, what are you up to? And why are you so hidden? So the book of Esther, quite honestly, is found and located in this little sliver of Jewish history. And it's the Jewish people living in the capital city of Persia, the capital city of Persia called Susa. And this is what it looks like. They were living in the Persian Empire. Now, there's something you need to know about the Persian Empire, and that's going to be relevant for our conversation today, and it's this. It's just a few things I want to tell you. First thing is this, that because it is in this Near Eastern Persian ancient culture, there's something important to say that'll help our conversation, like I just said, and it's this, is that there was not gender equality. In fact, women had to fight for their freedom. They had to fight for their identity. They had to fight for their safety. Because in this culture, they were seen as possessions. They were seen as a commodity. They weren't seen as something valuable or equal to men. No, they found themselves in a very dangerous culture that was debaucherous, that wasn't safe for them. The Persian Empire was not a safe place for them to be a woman. But then it gets worse a little bit for the Jewish people. They were actually under the rule of a very powerful and prideful king. And that king is King Xerxes. And this king, he was incredibly powerful. In fact, his kingdom is described as invincible, indestructible. It was a little bit desirable, but it was wildly dangerous for people. He was the most powerful man from, you can see on the map here, from Ethiopia to India. He ruled it all. And he loved making a point of just how powerful he was. He had this ego that was beyond measure. And he wanted everyone to know and understand just how powerful and influential he was. In fact, in chapter 1 of Esther, how we start the story, is that he actually throws a party to show everyone just how powerful he is. It's like an exclamation point on his power and his pride. And this is how the story of Esther begins. Follow along with me in verses 1 through 8. It says this: these events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. At that time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa, the capital. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of their provinces. It continues. The celebration lasted 180 days. This party lasts almost 6 months. Are you kidding me? But watch what happens. It was a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. And when it was all over, the king gave a banquet for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. It lasted for 7 days and was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. And the courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cords and purple ribbons to silver rings embedded in marble pillars. And gold and silver couches stood on a mosaic of pavement of periphery, marble and mother of pearl, and the other costly stones. I mean, you're starting to get the picture of just how rich and wealthy King Xerxes is. And he puts it all on display because he's got a huge ego. But it continues the party. It says this: drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine reflecting the king's generosity. By edict of the king, check this out. By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. And talk about partying like a rock star. I mean, seriously. Like, this is insane. This is the party to end all parties. It lasts for over 180 days for 15,000 people. This is like Mardi Gras meets spring break. There ain't no party like a Xerxes party because a Xerxes party don't stop. Literally. Well, that is until he invites his wife to the party. You see, you could tell in the text there that, honestly, King Xerxes is just showing off all of his power and all of his possessions and all of his wealth. But now, he wants to show off his most prized possession, his wife. Now, let's just think about this for a second. Do you think that this was going to be done in an honoring way to Queen Vashti? Or do you think he's inviting her to the party to really show off just how intellectually smart she was? Like to say, hey, I want you to show everyone how good you are at Persian and Babylonian math? No. Or maybe was the king bringing Queen Vashti in because of her personality, because she was so incredible at talking Babylonian and Persian politics? Not so much. This is how it happens in verse 11. So king here, reminder, he's been drinking. There's no end in wine. In fact, the text says he's high in spirits and demands his servants to bring Queen Vashti to him with a royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. Now, most scholars would agree that this was supposed to be done in a very objectifying, humiliating, and degrading way. But what's interesting here is that in a kingdom and people around Xerxes, he was surrounded by all these yes men. There was no woman that was not going to let herself crumble underneath the prideful power of King Xerxes. This is how it plays out. But when they conveyed the king's order to the Queen Vashti, she refused to come. And this made the king furious, and he burned with anger. Of course he did, because she denied the king's request. I mean, this is countercultural. She decided to stand up for herself and refuse to be humiliated by the king. And by doing that, she actually ends up humiliating the all-powerful and all-prideful King Xerxes. You know, in this moment, you kind of have to give it up for Queen Vashti, because this is countercultural. This doesn't happen in the Persian Empire. But she decides, within a crazy amount of pressure on her, to do what's right for herself. But so then, what happens? How does old, big, bad, powerful, prideful King Xerxes respond? Well, I'll tell you what he does. He actually turns to his royal council, to his cronies, to figure out what's the next move that he's going to make here. And this is what it says in verse 15. What must be done to Queen Vashti? You can hear just the anger the king demanded. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders, properly sent through his eunuchs? And it goes on to say, we meet this fellow named Memucan here. Memucan answered, the king and his nobles. Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti refused to appear before the king. And before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. And there will be no end to their contempt and anger. Okay, Mukin. Really? I mean, isn't this a classic case of us overreacting? And it gets to me thinking and wondering about this Mukin dude. Like, is he reacting like this because he's having problems at home? Is he sitting there with the other guys in the room, and are they all of a sudden worried that word's going to get out to every woman in the empire about the daring and courageous act of Queen Vashti? Then all of a sudden, they're going to start standing up and joining Team Vashti and fighting for their own human rights? Well, we don't know. We don't know why he overreacted this way, but it was exactly what the king wanted to hear. So this is interesting, because now you're going to see Mukin's solution to the Queen Vashti problem. He says this: so, if it pleases the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and the Medes that cannot be revoked. That just means it's a law that can never be reversed. It is cemented forever. And it continues, it should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. And then he rounds it out with verse 20. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. So what's the result? What's Mukin's answer to this? Well, he says, hey, King Xerxes, I need you to write this edict within the Persian and the Medes law that cannot be reversed ever again. And actually, a couple of verses later, King Xerxes approves this law. He says, yeah, let's put that into practice. But by doing this, it affects far more than just Queen Vashti. It actually impacts every single woman in the Persian Empire. It keeps all those wives and women silenced and voiceless for the foreseeable future, causing more hurt, more pain, more discomfort. And for them, it seems as if God is distant and God is hidden. I mean, in this moment, I asked myself, as I was reading the story, I was thinking, what was Xerxes thinking? Like, why is he deciding this? Why is he allowing this? And the truth is, he wasn't thinking. He was drunk on literal alcohol and his own pride. And so far in the story of Esther, which some of you are wondering, when is he going to get to her? Don't worry, we'll get there. But so far, all we have in this story of Esther is a party to end all parties. We have a drunken king and this drunk royal cabinet, right? We have them making decisions, hurting others, and we have insecure leadership with no accountability. And what's the result? It's just causing more pain, more abuse, more suffering. And now there's a group of people wondering, God, it's been so long, but now where are you in this moment, God? Where are you? You know, what's obvious to me in the story in chapter 1 of Esther and King Xerxes is that King Xerxes never really followed God. He didn't. In fact, I'm not sure he followed him in the first place, but he pushed God off the throne of his life. And when that happens, as we've just saw, this happens. When God gets pushed off his throne, people do despicable things. Just like King Xerxes. When we push God off his throne, people do despicable things. They listen to flawed advice from friends. They don't know their limits with alcohol. They do terrible things when it comes to their character and their moral choices. Right? They make sweeping decisions that damage communities and relationships beyond their imagination. You see, that is Xerxes' abuse of power. He did abuse his power as a king, and he was known for that. But I actually think all of us, in moments of our lives, are tempted to abuse the power that we have. Because here's the deal. We all have power. We have power in our communities, in our families, in our schools, in our relationships. We have influence. And I just want to take a second just to shoot you straight and tell you and encourage you, would you use your influence and your power for good? Wherever you are in the org chart at your job, whatever sort of status you have in your organization, whatever sort of influence you have in your community, in your family, in your world, I'm here to ask you and to beg you, please, would you use it for good, for the betterment of others? Please. Please don't let your ego drive you. No. Why would you be humble enough to put others before yourself and let them succeed in spaces and places that don't involve you? Would you just do good for others with the power and the influence you've been given? Don't let your ego get in the way of what you could do for other people. And what does ego stand for? Well, it's this. It's just edging God out. It's just quite literally what I described about when God gets off the throne, we do despicable things because our ego drives us, just like Xerxes. And when our ego drives us, do you know what happens? We become power hungry. We're motivated by power. We're motivated by status. We crawl over other people. We hurt other people. Right? We think we know better than God. We start acting quite literally like King Xerxes. But what's interesting to me is the stark contrast between King Xerxes and another king we know in God's word, and it's King Jesus. The contrast between the two couldn't be more profound. And I just want to show you and illustrate it this way. I created a little chart for you that I think will be really helpful to see the contrast of these two kings. And we'll start here. King Xerxes, he was the son of Darius, another oppressive king. But King Jesus, he was the Son of God who made him in his image. King Xerxes never tasted poverty nor humility, but King Jesus tasted both poverty and humility. King Xerxes used his power to abuse women, but King Jesus used his power to honor or empower women. King Xerxes spent his life being served, but King Jesus spent his life serving others. King Xerxes killed his enemies with armies, killing millions, but King Jesus died for his enemies, saving billions. And this last one is the key to the whole deal. King Xerxes sat on a throne in Susa, but King Jesus hung on a cross outside Jerusalem. You see, when I look at the contrast of these two kings, it makes me realize that I need to do whatever I can in my life to make sure King Jesus is on the throne of my heart and not King Xerxes. That King Jesus needs to be the focal point of my life, because I wonder, which one of these two kings would you want to follow? Like, which one of them? If you go back to that chart, you'll see this is the discrepancy between the two. And I wonder today, not only which one of these kings would you want to follow, but which one of these kings do you want to become? Because when King Jesus is the king of my heart, I start to dish out incredible compassion and love and generosity to others. And when I do that and when I live that way, this God isn't so hidden anymore. In fact, I'll love to phrase it this way. It's kind of the big idea of the day, and it's this. When King Jesus is the king of my heart, I start to treat others like royalty. When he's the king of my heart and the king of my life and the king of my desires and my everything, I start to treat others like royalty, with respect, with honor and dignity and empowerment. And I start to cheer on their success over mine. And when he's the king of my heart and I treat us like royalty, this God isn't so hidden to those any longer. But it does beg to ask the question, when it comes to the people of God in the first chapter of Esther, Would it have been difficult for them to find God if Xerxes was a king that followed God? The answer is no. If Xerxes would have been following God, God would have been very apparent to those Jewish people, but he wasn't. And it's really hard to find God when people aren't following God, which is exactly why in this series we're waiting for Esther to show up for her people. But that's next week. That's next week. But before we get to Esther next week, there's actually a question I need to ask you and actually an action step for you to take this week. And here's the question I want to ask. And as you ask yourself this: am I more like King Xerxes or King Jesus? Am I more like King Xerxes or more like King Jesus? Am I filled with pride or humility? Am I more about being served or serving others? Does my ego drive my life, or does my passion to see others thrive drive my life? Am I more concerned about getting my way, or am I actually more concerned with getting out of others' way so they can thrive? I wonder, which one are you becoming more like? King Xerxes or King Jesus? That's the first question to ask yourself. And here's the second call to action I would love for you to do this week, and it's this: find someone who is not used to receiving the royal treatment and give it to them. Find someone in your world who's not used to receiving the royal treatment and give it to them. It might be someone that's below you on the org chart. It might be someone in your house, a spouse or a child or your father. It might be that kid that's always getting picked on at school. It could be a number of different people. It could be your barista who makes your coffee, or your pizza delivery guy, or just someone in your world or neighborhood that doesn't have the clout or power or wealth that you do. But would you this week see them and meet them and actually do something for them that makes God less hidden? Maybe you just say, hey, can I pray for you? That you're patient enough in your life that you actually pause to someone that wouldn't expect you to actually care about them, but you do. Or would you actually take a little bit of the resources you have and bless someone in your life with generosity that looks just like King Jesus? I don't know what that is for you, but I believe God has a name on your heart right now. And he's telling you, hey, this is who I want you to go give the royal treatment to. And if you do, my friends, you'll start to become more like King Jesus and less like King Xerxes. And I think you will be glad you did. And that, my friends, is week 1 of Hidden God, the story of Esther. So I'm going to pray and wrap things up. God, I thank you so much for everyone hearing this message today. God, thank you so much that King Jesus is in our life and that it's not King Xerxes. But Lord, I pray right now that all of us, whatever season we find ourselves in, if it's difficult to find you, that we would all be able to take the courageous step to becoming more like your son Jesus, God. Even though it's difficult, even if we might be experiencing pain or discomfort or transition or waiting, God, would you just give us a little bit of courage to take a step to become more like your son, the King of our lives? And we pray these things in your name.